The Great American Novel, Chapter 1, Introductions. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Thank you for taking the time to sit and share my little story. I hope you enjoy our time together and that you come back often. In fact, maybe next time you can bring a friend. Don't lend them your copy of the story though. Make sure they get their own copy. Otherwise, you would defeat the purpose of my writing this. My name is Justin. Actually, it is Justinian. Justinian Theodosius Swinton, to be exact. My father was some sort of history geek and decided to thrust his little trivial pursuit upon me. Seriously, I couldn't make that up, and frankly wouldn't want to. Apparently Justinian and Theodosius were both rulers of the ancient Roman Empire. My father was one of those wannabe intellectuals who went around sprouting off useless bits of trivia in order to make himself seem smarter than he actually was. There is no doubt in my mind that he saddled me with this ridiculous name in a vain attempt to make himself seem like something more than what he was. What was he, you ask? We'll save that for another time. My friends just call me Justin or JT. You can imagine what growing up with a name like mine was like. My situation was not made any better by the fact that I was on the scrawny side and wore Coke bottle glasses all through grammar school. Let's just say there were many atomic wedgies and days that I went without milk at snack time. We all had our issues growing up, but that is neither here nor there. We can talk about childhoods later. Besides, it could have been much worse. I have a friend who is married to a football video game junkie. Her husband named their firstborn son Madden, as in John Madden football. I told her to buy the kid comfortable underwear. This story was all about my get-rich-quick scheme. Or at least, that was my original plan. Before you judge me, give me a chance to explain. I was reading the news one day and read an article about a famous author who was suing another author for copyright infringement. Sorry to be so vague with the details here, but the article mentioned that this author, the guy doing the suing, will bring suit at the drop of a hat. So again, excuse my lack of details, but I do not want to be the next guy he sues. If you do a quick internet search, I am sure you could figure out who I am talking about. It is no big mystery. In the story's background, they mention that the guy doing the suing had not published anything publicly since the 1950s. Now I knew this guy's book was a big deal. It is often referred to as the Great American Novel and is on the required reading list of most American high schools. If you can't guess his identity by now, forget about it. His name is not as important as the point I'm trying to make. What I did not know was that that book was the last thing he ever published publicly. That one book that he published almost half a century ago continues to sell over 250,000 copies every year. That means this guy did something over 50 years ago and has been living off the proceeds of it for the rest of his life. Imagine that, doing something once and then you are set for life. Here's another story for you to think about. A friend of mine is an entertainment lawyer. Her firm represents a guy who wrote a song back in the early 70s. She could not tell me the guy's name or the song. Attorney-client confidentiality, right? Well, anyway, this guy writes this song as a teenager. His band goes nowhere, but the song goes on to be one of those songs they play in stadiums at sporting events around the country to excite the fans. Every time that song gets played, he gets a check. Bottom line, he has drawn a 6-figure salary every year since the mid-70s because of that song. He has never worked a day in his life because he wrote a song as a teenager. You can see where I'm going with this, can't you? Like most people, I go to work at least 5 days a week and sometimes more. I do this primarily because I need money. Everyone needs money. Money makes the world go round. Money to eat. Money to keep a roof over your head. Money to do just about anything you want to do, and even some things you don't want to do, like be a good citizen and pay your taxes. Like most people, I go to work because I have to, not because I want to. Mind you, I know there are those who claim they work because they like to work. I think these people are either lying or they are sick in the head. We all know someone like this. The guy who says that even if he won a multi-million-dollar lottery tomorrow, he would still come to work the next day because he enjoys his job. They say, I would get bored just staying at home. I say people like that just lack imagination. Brother, if you have $1 million in hand, and you are just sitting at home because you can't think of anything to do, you do not deserve to have that kind of money. If I had the money and the time, I would find something to do. Money can't buy happiness. Maybe that is true. Maybe you can't buy happiness. I'm pretty sure you can rent it though. The question becomes, how do I get from point A to point B? How does one go from working stiff to financially independent? What is the process? Obviously, the easiest way is to be born into it. Actually, I guess that's not really true. Being born into something isn't really a process. It is really not hard or easy to do. It just happens. You cannot go from being born poor to being poor rich. Being born rich. Unless you can talk someone into adopting you. But unfortunately for me, that ship has sailed. I do not think there is much of a demand for adopting grown men with children of their own. Hey, if you know anyone who is looking for a prefab family, let me know. Maybe we can make a deal. A finder's fee is not out of the question. We all know that working for someone else will almost never lead to financial independence. Working for yourself can be tricky, not to mention hard work too. That brings us back to our author, the nameless author I mentioned before. All he did was write a book, and he never had to work again. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying it is easy to write a book, but let's just face it, writing a book is not like digging a ditch. You are not going to wake up in the morning aching all over because you were typing the day before. If you are, maybe you should try and get in some more exercise. A stationary bike or some lightweight training. I'm just saying. Anyways, I'm sure there are certain nuances and tricks and things that you have to do to put a book together. But how hard could it be? We can all read and write. Well, at least I know I can. And you can, or else you wouldn't be reading this now. I mean, how hard could it be to write a book? Just the same as talking, just with the added tedious step of typing it up. The only bitch is, you have to write about something that others will want to read about. You will need to create characters that people will care about. Characters that people can relate to. Then, you put them in an interesting scenario. Add a happy ending and poof, there you go. Instant bestseller, movie rights, executive producer credits, revenue in perpetuity. Let me back up. Note that I mentioned the word create. Let's face it, if you're going to write a best-selling book, it has to be fiction. If you look at a list of best-selling books of all time, look it up online, you'll see what I mean. Once you get past the Bible, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and the writings of Chairman Mao, after all, there are over 1 billion people in China, you have exactly what you would expect to find. A Tale of Two Cities, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and then there were none, The Little Prince, The Catcher in the Rye, so on and so forth. But what to write about? Well, when you talk about what you know. Otherwise, you will sound like an ass. There is nothing worse than listening to some fool talking ad nauseum about something they have no business talking about. You know, like the construction worker who is trying to tell the lawyer how the legal system operates. That lawyer gets paid thousands of dollars for 10 minutes of work. He was in the courtroom for less than 10 minutes and he got more than I make in a month. Well, he may have been in court for only 10 minutes. But what you did not see is what work he put in before he even got to the courthouse that day. The hours of investigation of the facts of the case, the gathering and interviewing of witnesses, the time spent researching the relevant case law, the time spent writing and rewriting the ironically named legal brief for the court, not to mention the years of legal education and experience that the lawyer brings to bear on a given matter. Then, of course, there is the professional risk he is taking by even attempting to handle the matter in the first place. Getting paid thousands of dollars for a couple minutes work, that would be nice. But it just ain't true. Trust me. I'm not bagging on construction workers here. It can go the other way too. Let's consider the lawyer trying to tell the electrician how to install an outlet. How hard could it be? Just unscrew this and install that and it should work, right? If it was that easy, the lawyer would not have to pay the electrician a couple $100 an hour to make a house call to fix what he messed up. The only thing worse than talking about something you don't know anything about is someone who talks or writes to feel better about themselves. They use the spoken or written word to prove to others how intelligent they are or how educated. To them, words are badges of merit. Their stories are not about entertainment, but rather they are a way to feel superior to the listener or reader. Like telling an inside joke in public and winking at the one person who gets it, while everyone else scratches their head. I was in an elevator at a hospital some years ago. The doors opened and in stepped two young doctors. I know they were doctors because their name tag said so. They were wearing short lab coats, the telltale sign that they were residents, doctors in training. Residents are the worst type of doctor. They have all the education and a fraction of the experience of the real McCoy. One was talking very excitedly about a baffling case he was working on. His companion suggested contacting a particular colleague in to consult on the matter. The first young doctor replied, "Well, frankly, I have certain trepidations about calling on Dr. So-and-so." Trepidations? Really? You mean you had reservations? Concerns? Or you were just plain too scared to call on him? Why can't you just say that? Oh, because there was a kid in the elevator, and the good doctor wanted to show off his education. Nice. Sorry your mom didn't love you enough, doctor. In college, I took a poetry reading course. I needed an easy elective. Anyway, we read a poem by a famous author. It had a very simple name referencing a piece of farming equipment. Again, pardon my vague description here, but I will tell you the poem, which is still protected by copyright laws, was about a brightly colored wheelbarrow sitting in a yard next to some chickens. It was comprised of only 16 words in 8 lines. The professor asked the class for its interpretation of the poem. One gentleman, seated in the back of the room, raised his hand. He started his answer to the teacher's question by giving us a brief history of the author. The author was a pediatric surgeon in the 20th century, the man explained. The equipment represented the doctor or author, or actually any doctor of the relevant time period. He explained further that surgeons in the 19th century, especially in Victorian England, would often wear red in the operating room so the bloodstains would not show. The white chickens going about their business around the equipment represented the nurses hovering around the doctor in their white nurses' uniforms. They were there, but ultimately useless, especially in the presence of such a vital instrument. In the poem, the writer, doctor, was telling the reader that he felt like an old piece of farm equipment that was not thought of until needed and then quickly discarded afterwards. Even those closest to him, in this case the nurse chickens, disregarded his presence despite the fact that it was among them. The poem, he reasoned, was a soliloquy on the complex role of the physician in the hospital setting at the turn of the 20th century. Despite the vital role played by the doctor, he was ultimately made to feel alienated and alone, set apart and ignored by those who most often relied upon him. It was about this point that I had stopped listening. The poem had nothing to do with doctors, nurses, or medicine. It was about a piece of farming equipment, a brief meditation on an everyday object that you wouldn't normally think about. End of story. If he wanted to write about doctors, it would have been titled Doctors in Red, Nurses in White. People who say otherwise are just trying to justify all those English courses they took in school and to be able to look down on all the rest of us who just don't get it. I think my issues with this type of thing might go back to my daddy issues I mentioned above, but again, that's not what this story is about.